The Chain Lightning Sorcerer destroys in the early game, but what about the late game? The answer might shock you, huh? Stick around for the objective facts to see what's going on. For the main skill, we're using Destructive Chain Lightning. This is going to be the thing that you use non-stop all the time. Pretty much everything else on this build is all cooldown based because you have a bunch of things that give you benefits when you use a cooldown, whether that be some kind of resource generation or actual defensives, and that's one of our passives that I'll be recommending here in just a moment. Now for those cooldowns, I'm using Shimmering Flame Shield as your oh shit button, Shimmering Teleport as it gives you more armor every time you do teleport. Ice Armor is just nice to use when you're in the thick of things or just to generate a little bit of resource if you need it. Lightning Spear is an interesting one because every time it crits something, it makes it vulnerable, which is pretty helpful. The Ball Lightning you see on this list, we actually skip, and I put those points elsewhere, like finishing out Ice Armor for the Enhanced Ice Armor for the mana regen, or teleport for the cooldown reduction on it. And of course, for the ultimate, we're using Overflowing Currents, and the key passive that we use in this one is Overflowing Energy. So lightning skills have this unique chance to create a crackling energy, which gives lightning sorcerers a myriad of benefits. And some of those benefits include like the key passive that we use and a couple other recommended passives. There's 4 that I would recommend more than anything else, and then obviously you can put your points wherever you want. And those 4 would be Glass Cannon, Protection, Mana Shield, and Invigorating Conduit. Now I know this is going to seem like we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, but Crackling Energy reduces the cooldown on your ultimate, which is how you clear things much faster than normal. When you use that, you're basically a Super Saiyan or a Sith Lord. They're in the same vein for this scenario. But the other thing that you get from Crackling Energy is nearly infinite mana because of Invigorating Conduit. Because every time you pick one up, you're getting 12 mana back, which is insane. Now when it comes to the skill tree, I know I've said this before, but you can use whatever the hell you want to use. This is just what I'm using to showcase this build. Now of course, as a sorcerer, you have the unique ability to enchant your skills, which means you get a little bonus key passive for whatever you choose. And the 2 that I'm using and I would recommend for this one is Chain Lightning, because every time you spend X amount of mana, you get a free Chain Lightning cast. And the other one is Lightning Spear. And like we said earlier, Lightning Spear's critical hits make enemies vulnerable, which increases your damage by X amount based on how much you have plussed to your vulnerable damage. Now for the aspects on this one, I'm going to have it in 2 parts, which is basically just offensive and defensive, but your main offensive aspect that you want to use is Unbroken Tether. Unbroken Tether has a chance to make your Chain Lightning bounce like 4 or 5 additional times each time you cast it. But the other offensive aspects, again, like usual, you can use whatever you want, but the things that I recommend are Storm Swell, Conceited, and Elementalist. But for the defensive aspects, I recommend things like Everliving, Snow Veiled, and Disobedience. As for the stats you want to look for on your gear, this has changed greatly in Season 4, and this is one of the things that I'm extraordinarily excited about for this season. But they've consolidated a bunch of things like the way that damage works or damage modifiers, so you don't have to be jumping on a trampoline and petting your dog at the same time to do bonus damage or whatever the case is. But it still breaks down to kind of the same idea. You still want to go critical hit chance. You still want to go critical hit damage. You still want things like cooldown reduction, attack speed, and intellect. Now for the defensives, cooldown reduction is still extremely important because every time you use one, you proc the protection passive, and that gives you a barrier, which gives you more damage if that's still even a stat right now. But you get a barrier, so that's important. The other couple that you want to look for is just basic armor and resistances, whether it's all res or specific elements that you're going up against. But like I said, nowadays in Season 4, the stats themselves should be pretty straightforward for everybody. Now, for the Paragon, this one is a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people because there's so much variance that you can do as a person. You can click on any one of these things that you want. I like to follow the max roll guides when it comes to these. It just gives you a really good idea of what you should be building into and what stats to look out for. There's a few things that I question and change myself. I will obviously leave that up to you, but what they recommend for this build is a board that looks like this, and the runes are Elementalist, Territorial, Charged, Reinforced, Destruction, Control, and Exploit. I do absolutely love using their Paragon boards because it takes a lot of the guesswork out of should I be using this or should I be using that, but like I said, I like to modify it to kind of make it my own most of the time. I'll probably change like 10, 20, 30 points here and there. But moving on to the end game shit, there's really not a whole lot that you need to worry about with gathering for the end game. It's literally Tal Rasha's ring has got to be the #1 thing, and then the necklace is Essadora's something or other. It's Essadora's Overflowing Cameo. I would have literally never remembered that name, but it's fucking awesome. Every time you pick up one of your Crackling Energies, which we talked about previously, you have a chance to release a lightning nova, and that gets like multiplicatively better based on your intellect. And I believe that's changing in season 4 to be a little bit more competitive with your other skills to make it more worth getting. The playstyle for this build is not super hard at all. Just spam chain lightning and use lightning spear whenever it's on cooldown, and use the rest of your cooldowns to generate, like I said earlier, both resource and a barrier. When it comes to bosses, which this build is not very good at, stand still because you're the rubber and they're the glue. Your chain lightnings will bounce off of you and stick to them. Yep. I wrote that down in my video notes, and I decided it was going to make it to the live one, so enjoy. Haha. Anyway, objectively, this build clears regular and elite mobs with ease, making it a very fast general farmer. It does, however, as previously stated, slow down quite a bit when it comes to bosses. I think it took most of my run time to kill the end boss in this pit. And that's even with using unstable currents on cooldown every time I can. Speaking of that, I started out the new pit clapometer. If you've seen any of my previous content, you know what I'm talking about here, and it threw down a zappy 3 minutes and 48 seconds. The clapometer is something I made up in another game that gives us a pretty good idea of what each build can do at certain points in the game. It started out like this, and then it ended up like this. So stick around, because it's only going to get better here in Diablo 4. Now I gotta ask, what build are you planning on playing or are currently playing in Diablo 4? Let me know in the comments down below, and do me a favor, if you like this kind of content, subscribe and maybe like this video, because it's free and it really helps out the channel here. You can also hang out with me live here on YouTube at least once a week, so stay keen on the announcements tab in my Discord to find out when that is. There'll be a link to that in the description down below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube recommends this next one for you. Happy grinding, my friends, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.